There we go. I don't believe we record these. I think we just go live. So the first bill we're going to take up, and thank you all for being here, is House Bill 154, which is sponsored by Delegate Palakovich-Carr, which is a bill, I'm going to make sure I read the title correctly here when I do this, that deals with, come on, there we go. Deals with anaphylactic food allergies, guidelines, and requirements. Essentially, the bill requires school systems to come up with a policy for dealing with it. It defines some of the major food allergens, and that's borrowed from a federal definition. There are 9 of them on the list. Only 8 currently exist, but the 9th one's coming on soon, according to my research. And there's a couple of things that it tells the county to adopt programs and do some informing. First of all, are there any questions about what the bill is about? And I have a couple of amendments that I'm going to suggest that we take up on this one. Okay, anyone? All right, so there are 2 things in the bill that we felt, at one point it said it's going to define roles for people in the school building. If that procedure defines roles, I felt that it should define roles that are in accordance with the collective bargaining agreement of some of the working groups that are identified there. And I think Alistair has an amendment to that effect. Another one is that it says farther down on page 3 on line 15 that they will ensure that students have access to all events. In telling them they have to ensure them is sometimes a high bar to hold. So Alistair, did you come up with some different language for that?
Yes, very sophisticatedly. It now says provide guidelines designed to ensure that students with anaphylactic allergies are able to participate in school events.
Okay. And then finally, MABE was concerned about when private groups are using, and they wanted to use, what's correct? Alistair, help me with the phrase that they want there instead.
So rather than say private groups, we're being a little bit more specific and saying outside public or private individuals, groups, and entities.
Make sure they're aware. There's one other point of concern, but I think we'll discuss that one. These 3 all kind of fit together. If we can separate them out, but if somebody feels like these are reasonable, wants to talk about them, I'd accept a motion on all 3 of those as a single amendment.
I move favorable on these amendments.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. So I have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Delegate Griffith. I appreciate that. Is there any discussion about those 3 or any clarification that's needed on them? Okay, seeing none, then we'll take a vote on that. All in favor of these amendments to House Bill 154, signify by raising your hand up because I can see you all then. I see no objection. Lasanta, you're not on screen. There she is, raising her. Oh, you're actually, she's a dentist. God love you. That's dedication right there. I got to tell you, I'll let you, any other way that you want to call in, you can do that too. Okay. So the other amendment is one where it said that the cafeteria must post. Would you read the language for me out of that one, please, Alistair?
Absolutely.
Page 4, line 4.
Yes. So in general, this bill has to do with anaphylactic allergies and making sure the public is aware of any of these foods that might be in any food served at the school. So this specific language requires that each day, food that is served in the school, for all food served in the school shall post in a conspicuous location in the cafeteria a list of the foods being served that contain any major food allergens. So in other words, every day there would be in some public space in the cafeteria, if a food contained peanuts or soy or any of those things listed on page 2 of the bill, that would be listed for the students to see. There's an additional requirement above that that be posted on the internet for the week. So this would kind of be double notification.
So I wasn't sure about the physical posting being necessary. It seemed like it might be duplication of effort and perhaps a lot of effort, considering all the things that are being done. So I suggest, Alistair, that we discuss the possibility of striking that part from the bill. Is there any discussion on that? Because I think it would be appropriate for us to here at this case, especially since they're going to post it online for the week.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Griffiths.
I agree with that. For duplication of effort, between the internet, the emails that go out, all the communications, and obviously, maybe there's opportunity wherever it's posted already that you add that in, but certainly to dedicate a separate posting is probably overkill. But obviously, I defer to you.
How does it read, Alistair, that when they send it out in the email and that information's in there?
Yes, I should be clear. I misspoke earlier. They have to develop a system to notify parents electronically, which could be through posting on the website or emails or both. But the requirement is just that there is some sort of electronic notification.
So, Delegate Griffith, I assume that you said that you were comfortable with that. Is that to paraphrase?
I am, yes.
Okay. So is there any other comment on this? All right. So do we want to move this amendment?
Move favorable on the amendment.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Delegate Boatler. Is there any further discussion on this amendment to House Bill 154? All right. Seeing none, all in favor signify by either raising your hand or saying aye. We'll do this to be sure. Any opposed? All right. So that carries unanimously. I don't have any other amendments to the bill, so I'm willing to entertain a motion on a favorable report on the bill.
Move favorable as amended.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. I see Delegate Guyton threw her hand up. Boatler, we've got seconds and thirds. Any discussion on the bill? All right.
I'd like to ask a question about the bill in general. Has this been a major problem in our schools with kids who have had allergies like this? And, there doesn't seem to be any response to them. And the reason I ask this is because my wife is a principal at a private school, and I know that she deals with this. But she only does it in a general sense, but she has never had any kids so far that, who have allergies like peanut allergies or things like that. I'm just wondering, this is a lot, I think, to put on the school system with everything else we've put on them. And I'm just wondering, is there really a problem there that this necessitates this?
Okay, so I'm looking among our advocates, and I see Leslie Fry from Montgomery County Schools. Leslie, are you interested in commenting on the necessity for it for Delegate Boatler?
Oh, I'm sorry, Delegate Eversole. I'm
Please,
from
thank you.
County Intergovernmental Relations, and I don't represent the schools.
Okay, sorry, I only saw Montgomery County on there.
Oh, thank you, though.
I was wrong. I don't see anyone from school system in particular. I see some people from MSEA, but I don't see anyone on my list currently. Maybe I should widen it a little bit and take a better look and see if there's anybody else here.
Mr. Chair, I'm from Baltimore City.
Oh, Duana, thank you. I didn't, you were on your name. I didn't have my screen wide enough to see everybody. Thank you. You want to weigh in on that question at all
Yes.
for us?
Duana Surratt, Baltimore City public school system. There's not a large, we already have in place precautions for students that have issues. There's a school nurse that's made aware, and at some point there's sometimes separation so that they are not able to be in contact with the foods that they have allergies. But it's not a large issue, but we aren't protesting having it up on the website,
Okay.
since we do put the meals weekly on the website already.
Okay. Delegate Boatler, does that help you? Does that help answer the question or not?
Well, not really, but it's fine. We can move
Okay.
on from here.
Thanks.
Delegate
I don't know that
Butler,
we have statistics in front of us, actually, so we're at a little disadvantage there.
I could tell you a little bit about the law background, not really any statistics on allergies in schools, but we currently have legal requirements for peanut allergies only in statute, and all the county boards have adopted guidelines for helping prevent the safety of helping keep students safe who have allergies. So in essence, I think a lot of the guidelines actually match what's in this bill, but this would be basically asking schools to update their guidelines to take into account other allergies besides peanut allergies. They're a little bit more specific than what's in current code, but I don't think it's a far leap from what schools currently do.
Any other discussion on the bill? All right, we have a motion and a second for favorable. I'm going to take a vote. Everyone in favor of this bill, please raise your hand or say aye. Any opposed? Okay, we have enough here. I don't see Delegate Lasante online. She's coming on and going off, but we do have enough people to move favorable on that. So that's a favorable report, and we'll bring that one before the committee. Okay, next bill, House Bill 136, which is also colloquially known as Brinley's Law. This is the bill that asks for some training for public school employees. I think private school employees as well. Is that right, Alistair? It also includes private schools. There's like two sections to this one, right?
Yes, apologies. I was struggling with my unmute button.
Sorry.
Private schools are authorized but not required under this bill.
Excellent. So if you were at the hearing, you would note that both I and the Education Subcommittee chair were concerned about the proliferation of trainings that teachers are expected to do, how much time it takes them in the act, and whether or not they're valuable. I concern myself as a teacher who's been through them, that not only does it take time away from our ability to prepare for instruction on sometimes a pretty large level, there's an assumption we can do it on free time. You know, it's not really, I don't know what free time is for sure. It sounds like we're not getting paid, and that's often true. Someone suggested that we do it during lunch, which is the training I gather is 45 minutes long, so it would exceed a typical teacher's lunch. I vetted with MSCA and also with leadership here an idea, which I'm going to describe to you now. And then I think Alistair sent out the amendment, but essentially what the amendment is designed to do is to create sort of well-trained people in the building, at least one, perhaps two people who actually do get the training. And then they would at some other time give an abbreviated training, or what they called a bridge training, to the rest of the staff. I'm going to argue in favor of this amendment because I think it has two values. It uses less time for teacher preparation, but it also adds credibility to the presentation. If there are 20, I think Howard County, I got a list, they have kind of 14 or 15 trainings that they do, and they're all mostly on PowerPoint. They tend to blend together and not really carry significance. So it would accomplish two things. I think it would add significance. I think it would take less time. And I think it might probably much more effective. So this is a new idea that I have for doing this, because we get a number of requests throughout the years for teachers to be trained on various, how to react in various situations. And if you watch the testimony of the people who have children who regularly have seizures, I know that and I bet most of you also sympathize with them a great deal. And so this model would also require the people who get trained get paid at a professional development level for the time they spend training, and that the training of the other members of the staff occur during what would be regularly scheduled hours. For example, when I worked in Howard County, one day a month, we knew that we had to stay for an extra hour in our contract for a faculty meeting. And so that would be part of our contracted time. And an administrator could choose to have that presentation done during that time. I think it's biannually is what the bill said, and that's what we're going to stick with on this. Alistair, if I missed any details that I went over with you on this, I can't remember for sure. So if I did,
I think that mostly covers everything. I would just say that the training for the registered nurse or the nurse's designee would include guidelines developed by the State Department of Education in consultation with the Department of Health and Seizure Action Network, and that the abridged training would be based on those guidelines as well.
Right. And the only other thing was that we softened the language a little bit on page 2, line 25, where it said they required teachers to do it. I think you changed that slightly so that they could seek people, or in the amendment. Is that true? Am I right?
Everyone is still required to be trained, but they would be compensated for their training.
Right. But the two people that they pick.
Oh, it would now be one person, the nurse or the nurses or someone that school nurse designates. Yeah. Okay. So the amendments were sent out. They're not terribly complicated, and in spirit, that's exactly what they do. So I think we can take this amendment up if everyone's comfortable with that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Delegate Wilkins.
we can discuss after adopting. I just wanted to make sure I understand. So with the amendment, I'm looking at it. You're saying it's just the school nurse or their designee. So one person in the school.
I would have preferred more, but actually the advocates kind of came to saying, well, it should be the school nurse. I would have said they could have had more than one person. And if we want to change that, we can. And those would be sort of the trainers. So we're training the trainers there is what we're going for in this. So they wouldn't be the only people in the building who would have had access to information about how to deal with seizures. They would have been the ones who were trained more thoroughly.
Okay, so one person gets the school nurse gets in-depth training, they bring it back to the school.
Yeah.
And the personnel get trained.
Yeah, that's the model.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say I like this and I'm really interested in this bill after I've told this story before, but having witnessed a seizure at a legislative conference that I was with other folks on the committee with, it was very, very shocking to see. And so I've been particularly interested in this bill since. I do think that maybe we should say like at least the school nurse, just so that in case there's a system that wants to include other people, that we could broaden it a little bit to keep it flexible. So maybe just at least.
That's an excellent suggestion. And since it's sort of my amendment, I'm sure I would like to add that into my suggestion. So when we move on, that's in there. So now the amendment has Delegate Wilkins will have, because Alistair's quite adept, will have Delegate Wilkins adjustment there in it. Is there any other discussion on the amendment of the concept? As I say, I've got pretty good buy-in from teachers, the teachers collective bargaining agent, and from the legislative leadership and chair. I'll kind of want to try this idea. And I think, we're going to watch very carefully to see how it works. I don't think we're going to put in any studies or any reporting, but I think we can get a sense of how it's going. I think people in the epilepsy will keep a close eye to see if things are happening the way they want them to. They'll probably talk to people. I'm sure we'll get some feedback on how this goes. But it's a unique idea, and I think it finds a middle ground between people who want teachers to be well aware of how to deal with students in different situations, and at the same time trains them pretty well and doesn't overburden them with training that they can't really inculcate all of the time. All right, so I'll accept a motion on the amendment if somebody wants to make it.
Move the amendment.
Thank you, Delegate Boatler. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of this amendment to Brindley's Law, House Bill 136, raise your hands or say aye. Do I have any members opposed? I do not. Okay, so we've moved the amendment. The bill is amended.
Move favorable as
Thank you,
amended.
Delegate Wilkins. Do I have a second?
Second.
I see seconds all over the place, and so I'm going to take them. Is there any further discussion on the bill as amended? Okay, seeing none, I would like to take a vote on that, please. All in favor of the bill as amended, raise your hands or say aye. Any opposed? None. Okay, so we've got it. All right. So that's good news because we're very close to quorum, and those are the two items I wanted to take action on today. We now need to take some time to discuss a bill that requires some discussion, and that would be House Bill 226, which the correct title for it is actually, I will say that the shorthand word for it is getting some cameras into special education classrooms. That's exactly how it reads. Public schools, self-contained special education classrooms, use of video recording devices. There are a couple of things that I want to bring up for discussion here today. There's a couple things that I feel are some house cleaning. On page 2 of this bill, number 4 defines something called exclusion area. And later in the bill, we're told that we have to have cameras in exclusion areas. There are 3 things there are 3 levels of things that we do with students. We exclude them from classroom, we restrain them, we seclude them. Exclusion area could be anywhere you send the students so for a time they do not receive instruction. So I think this is probably a misinterpretation of the word exclusion area in this case. And if you're concerned about cameras in seclusion areas, there's another bill, and you all remember from last year, and it's coming around the corner, which deals specifically with when students are secluded, that is locked up in a sense, and that one does require cameras. So I believe we can strike the exclusion area from this. But is there any discussion on that? We're not going to move the amendments today, so I'm going to talk about them, and then based on what I hear, what notes Alistair has, we will draw up an amendment for our next meeting. Okay. Delegate Guyton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate bringing this to discussion today. I did actually send in an amendment that included what you just suggested, so I did want to bring your attention to it. I'm not sure why it wasn't included in the information for today, but Alistair, it's amendment number 213127/01. It's been in since last week, I think, after Chair Ebersol and I spoke about this bill. He had several questions, and so I tried to answer them in this amendment, and that was one of them.
How does the amendment deal with the exclusionary concept? Because that's
it strikes it from the bill.
Okay, well, there you go. So
there are other changes in that amendment.
We'll probably try to include stuff from your amendment in the larger amendment if we can. And since you tend to agree with that, does anybody else have any discussion about excluding exclusion from the bill, taking the exclusion part out of the bill? All right, so Alistair, make a note that we'll probably do that as part of, we'll adopt that from Delegate Guyton's amendment, okay? Smaller things that we need to deal with. Farther down in the bill where we talk about who gets to see the video originally. These are all people who are professionals who make judgments about situations like this. But then after a judgment is made, the video can be viewed by parents and children. I would like to add, and these are on page 5. There are 2 places in section G, number 3, and section H, number 2, which are on lines 8 and 20 respectively, that we add that the employees who were impacted after judgment is made also be allowed to view the video. And so I will open discussion on that also. Your hand is still up. I don't know if it's up from before. You could just kind of raise your hand. I can see.
That's also in the amendment. Would you like for me to go through the changes I've made in this amendment? Because I think it addresses most of the concerns that you had from last week.
Okay.
Because that is also in the amendment.
All right.
Alistair, I don't know if you can send that to everyone or not. I mean, I'll leave that to your discretion, Mr. Chair, but rather than
so it's sufficient rather than mixing the amendments here that we're working on.
Would you like to hear what's in that amendment?
Not yet, no. Thank you though. So I think it's sufficient then for you to say that you agree with this at this point. In other words, if you have an amendment that does the same thing that I'm talking about, and we still need to explain it to people, then I'm going to do that. And if you say, yeah, that's part of my amendment, I agree, that's good to know. Thanks. Okay. Any other discussion on the concept of that? There's one other little thing that goes in there where it says that you can't use this video to sort of get a kid in trouble for something else. It's written a little more formally than that. I think also, as long as it's not criminal, an employee should also not be held culpable for something that is not criminal or dangerous in nature, but something else that shows up in the video. So I would just want to add them in to parents to children in this case.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just making sure. I have an email about an hour ago with amendments to 136 and 154. Do we have these amendments that you're referring to as well? Okay, I was just.
No, they haven't been written, and so I'm just asking. Okay. I'm in spirit saying what I think I want to do. I didn't want to write amendments because I thought it might be preemptory here to do that. I wanted to hear what people thought about things, and then once we get an amendment written, we'll send it out and for comment. People can even comment offline to me before we bring it. This is a bill with some complications, so we have to. I'm trying to move with all deliberate speed, but deliberate's an important word here. So thank you.
Gotcha. So on the latest amendment, I'm of both minds on that one.
Okay.
I think that if there was something egregious that happened to be caught, I'm just a little bit concerned that it wouldn't be able to be used. Although I do understand that can get a little crazy. Yeah,
I'm going to read this section and see how we would interpret it. Because it says, it take me a second to find it here, but I'll be there in a minute. The department, county board, school principal may not use a video recording. 1, as evidence in a complaint against a student that is not related to a criminal complaint or in the observation evaluation of a student for student placement decisions. So the number one is the one I'm talking about. Do we need to have more than, because they say it's not related to a criminal complaint. Now, it doesn't say it's not related to criminal activity. So I see, is that your concern? I think I'm seeing that a little bit.
After you just read the language, I think we're on the same page.
Okay, and I would like to add that you know, in the same way, if there's no criminal complaint against a teacher, if it's just their methodology or something like that, we can't really use it in a complaint against them. If somebody says this teacher is just not a very good teacher or something like that, well, we're not going to use that as evidence for that. It has to be done differently than this. So that's kind of what I was going for there. Certainly, I don't need answers on this at this instant. We're kind of plowing some stuff out there, and this will be. I will spend some time in during the week talking to folks too. So Delegate, I see your hand is up. I also see Delegate Griffith. I know it's Griffith, but if it's possessive, it's Delegate Griffith's hand.
I answered to Griffiths. I mean, a pretty wide variety.
Mine was possessive with an apostrophe and an S on it there, okay? Because it's Griffith's hand. So I can almost say it. So go ahead. What's your
So as I think everybody knows, I have a 7-year-old in public school in a Strive program, and this would affect him and other kids like him. So this bill's super important to me. I see. I actually like where we're going in the last conversation in terms of I think it should be opened up to criminal activity, not just complaints, because you know I think when you say complaint, it becomes very narrow. But if somebody, you know, I guess this is my time on judiciary speaking. I'd rather, if I had any say just criminal activity or complaint, right? Obviously, we're not trying to handle performance and all that stuff, and nor do I think any of us have any appetite for that. We're just trying to make sure that bad actors who are legitimately like bad things are being being handled, and these kids are being protected. So I actually like criminal activity or criminal complaint, because not all criminal activity necessarily formulates a actual complaint. And so just my thought there.
Yeah, and I think the intent, and I could be wrong, and Delegate, this is you're the lead sponsor of this bill, so maybe you can tell us. I think the intent there was, and like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, because that's how I read it, to avoid ancillary activity, ancillary notifications, ancillary pickups. Like we don't want these. We want these to address the complaint that was made, and not necessarily other things. And so I honor that, but like Delegate Griffith says, we might be hard to ignore something that we see there. So can you comment on that, Delegate Guyton, a little bit?
No, this hasn't come up in any of our conversations with others, but I would agree both with Delegate Wilkins and Delegate Griffith that we don't want to be too specific about that piece of it, because we do happen to see, someone in the background actually breaking a law and hurting a child. Then while they're looking at the complaint, then I'm, I would love to see what other people think about how to handle that. We certainly don't want to just let that go.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, and I think criminal activity is broad enough yet narrow enough at the same time to accomplish what we're trying to do with this bill.
Right. So, and we're not. I guess what I was thinking is, we're not just looking at non-criminal activity by students that we don't want to pay attention to. It's also non-criminal activity by the adult that we don't really feel like they should get caught by accident here. This is not the right vehicle for it. Is that kind of what? I feel like that's what the intent of that section was.
It is.
So my question is, and it's a question, does anyone object to adding the employee into that if we get the language right on it?
I mean, I think it's a duty, as a citizen, if you witness criminal activity, right? I think that's appropriate.
Yeah. So, but I think the section deals with non-criminal, isn't that right? Alistair, do I have that right? It says if it's non-criminal activity. In other words, we're not going to pinch a kid for pinch. I don't mean literally pinch, because bad example in light of this bill. We're not going to say that a kid, if he's breaking a rule, like he throws a pencil across the room. This is what we talked about in an education sub the other day. And we're not gonna let this video let us say, okay, that kid needs to be, he needs detention
Yeah.
because he threw a pencil across the room. At the same
Yeah.
time, yeah,
I'm sorry. So I'm agreeing with you. I think my understanding is this isn't about discipline. This is about protecting, children from criminal activity. So I agree with where you're going with that.
okay, let's, in the offline, I want to read it more carefully to see what it's doing. And then ultimately I want to see if we think, and maybe we don't, maybe we think, that while we could sort of protect kids from being sort of noticed for what's considered more routine bad behavior by them, maybe we can't let adults off the hook for that. Maybe we don't include them here. If something is noticed that is egregious while not illegal. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Delegate Wilkins.
Yes, I do agree with that. I think it's important to make sure that children are excluded. I do feel a little bit concerned about excluding adults, because if the camera, although it's not the intention, if the camera does happen to pick something up, I do think that that's something of concern that needs to be looked into. So I wouldn't want to completely discard it and make it unable to be used. So I would say if there are advocates who are on the line who feel otherwise, or there's something that we're missing, maybe they can follow up with us. But I'm a little concerned about us excluding the adults if there's something that does come up by chance.
Thank you. It's a general impression I'm getting. So while I originally thought maybe we should, I'm sensing the subcommittee not as interested. Delegate Guyton, your hand's still up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't know if someone from the state's attorney's office was here to answer that question, or from MSEA. I know we worked on that language about not being used for teacher evaluation or for any other purposes other than the specific criminal complaint. But then we also realized that could be covered by general mandatory reporting law, so that you have to report something of a criminal nature when you're looking at a video if you're working for the school system. So I'd love it if there's someone, if Christy from MSEA or someone is here that wants to jump into that.
We have Sam Zwirling and Lauren Lamb on from MSEA, so perhaps they would like to weigh in a little bit on this one. There's Lauren. Thanks, Lauren, for being here. You're muted still. Still got a mute for you right now. There you go.
I'm so sorry about that. I'm here on behalf of MSEA. We would have to take a look at the language here and run it by our council.
Okay. I think that's what we're going to have to do. I think there's reluctance to make it too prohibitive for adult behavior. In this case, I get that from Delegate Wilkins. And at the same time, I think so. There's a big gray line in the middle of this, it looks like, between criminal behavior, bad behavior, and kind of routine disruptive behavior. And so we got to find language that draws a nice line there, I think. And whether we include adults or at all will be something I'll talk with you all about a little bit to find out. And I'll talk with MSEA and see what they have to say about that as well. I always defer. John Williams, do you have anything to add to this? I see you from MABE, and boards of education might be relevant here.
Thank you, Delegate Ebersol. Just to say that if we're retaining the video and there's a complaint filed by either a parent or an employee against an employee or another student, that's going to be discoverable, by council. And so it is difficult to create a bright line between the use of video for enforcement purposes, criminal investigation purposes. But it is not the intent that this video would be being watched live or routinely other than based on a complaint. So I did want to emphasize that as well.
It's a good point. It's an excellent point.
I mean, I think the intent of this legislation is to limit the viewing. It's not to have a video camera that's always watching these teachers. It's for every purpose. It's to have a video camera watching these teachers for complaints related to neglect and abuse.
Right.
And I think you guys might want to shy away from roping in, a state in which teachers are just being watched all the time.
Right. I think the question comes is that if we do view it, and how much attention are we allowed to pay, or do we allow ourselves to pay to ancillary behaviors that are occurring? If they're
discovery laws will be. Oh, I'm sorry. Any discovery laws can be subject to whatever you guys pass, at least in the state of Maryland. So,
All right. Thanks. That one's one we're gonna have to work on. Like I said, I'll probably chat with you all offline to find out what your thinking is and how hard we should work on language for that. I already said that I think I said this, Alistair, tell me if I'm wrong, that in the viewing that the employee should be allowed to view if there was a complaint that was resolved either negatively or positively, they should be able to see it as well as the parent and student. There's also a section that talks about notifying people there's going to be a camera. I noticed that parents are notified, but the only notification for employees is a sign outside the door. I would like to add that employees are notified there's going to be a camera in their room 2 weeks in advance, which I think is a great idea because the idea of this is not to catch people. I believe ultimately the idea is to prevent people from doing things that they might do in a moment when they're not thinking clearly. And maybe they would force them to think more clearly. So I think having a 2-week notice that, hey, you're going to have a camera in your room. I did talk to a couple of special education people who said that would probably be, if a special educator walked into a room and saw a camera and didn't know it was going to be there, they wouldn't understand how it was going to be used or in what way, and it would probably cause a pretty negative reaction. So I would like to add in that the educators who are going to be using that room be notified that there's a camera. And I think that accomplishes purpose here because, like I said, then it becomes more preventative rather than punitive in this case, hopefully. So does anybody have any comment on that, about how they feel about that addition, that change? Okay. So then the last one is the big one. And I saved it for last because we're really going to have to work on this. On page 2, line 15, we have a definition of a self-contained special education classroom, which to me I'm having trouble figuring out how it works. I know that the general intent is to find that sort of one classroom in the building that actually is the one where students have trouble telling what happened in the class. They're not verbal when they come out. So if something's wrong, they can't explain it to people. And I feel like this one just says where 50% of the time they're in a self-contained classroom. It feels like someone, not us maybe, but someone could interpret that to mean a whole host of classrooms in the building. I would like to get suggestions on the language, but my initial one is that toward the end of the definition, it talks about, it doesn't say it has to be, it says including, but I'm wondering maybe we shouldn't use this as our definition, including students who are certificate bound and who have, I could read the exact language, I don't have it, I could click over to it, but I'll just continue the sentence here, that can't rely on verbal skills to express themselves. I'm wondering if we shouldn't make that the definition of the room we're looking for here, so that we do get it down to sort of one room in this case. And I wonder if anybody has any commentary on that. We don't have to get the definition tight, but I really think I would like some of the advocates to send us, me and Alistair, some language that we can parse and see if we can't get something that would define this in a way that I think will keep it specific and keep it targeted where it was supposed to go. Delegate Guyton, see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, after thinking about that, I was wondering if putting the phrase where all of the students in this classroom fall into that category. And again, you have that written suggestion.
No, and I like that. I worried that was a little too strong for the people who advocate for this, that it would limit it. But it also strikes me that if there are students in the classroom who are verbal, they could actually be asked what happened. Okay. I mean, in a way, they would almost be available to talk about.
Right. I'm so sorry. That was a misunderstanding. I should have expressed that. So adding the words all of the students in the classroom spend more than 50% of their time in that classroom, but not saying that all of the students have to be nonverbal. So I did not mean that actually. And that would be somewhat problematic, I think, if we said all of them are, because there are very few classrooms that would have all nonverbal students. So they have different communication challenges.
So in the interim between this and our next meeting, perhaps you could come up with what you think is a good standard of the nonverbal students, what percentage or how often they're there or something like that to help us get this down to a definition where it would target what I think most of you have said is kind of the one classroom in the building where students are vulnerable and can't express what's happened to them in a vulnerable situation. So I believe that's the intent. If I'm wrong, I need somebody correct me on that, but I'm kind of waiting. Okay. We need to come up with some language that defines the class clearly. Now, The last part of this is I listened to the testimony, and I understand Texas has a program going. I don't think everybody's doing it in the state. I think I believe they can adopt into it if they want to. I believe they're required. The way this bill's originally written would require 50% and then 100%. And I know that I saw your amendment on that, Delegate. I didn't know all the other stuff was there. We go smaller percentages. After some real soul searching here and some discussion with some of the advocates and even the bill sponsor, I believe I would like to make this program a pilot. I'd like to entice or get voluntarily 3 school districts in the state of Maryland that would have 1 elementary and 1 secondary school participate in this program at the state's expense. The question I have, and I need input on this, is if we put it out there and say, hey, you can get this for free if you want it, do you think they'll take it? Do you think 3 systems will step up? And if you don't think so, then how do we say, well, there's no interest and give up? No, you guys won't want to do that, I'm sure. Do we find a way to give them an incentive to do it? Or the more heavy-handed one would be to allow the State Department of Education to select 3 districts to do it. So I'm open to some discourse on that. And Mike, I'm sorry, Delegate Griffith, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question is, why wouldn't we make this mandatory? What would hold us back from doing this?
Does anybody want to answer that? I mean, I can tell you what the thinking is we don't really know if it's going to be effective doing what we think it will do, and it will be very expensive. Okay, so there's some evidence, but we don't really know that the camera really stops people from doing things or really catches them. And so I think what we would do with a pilot is we would, and that's the next question, is what sort of data would we gather from the pilot to get an idea of its effectiveness?
Well, so Mr. Chair, I think you made the point perfectly earlier where you stated that this is a deterrent method. And if this works the way we want it to, there would be no evidence of wrongdoing to capture. And by having no incidents, it shows, in my opinion, this works. So what would be the data? What would be the determining factor if it worked or not? If it catches people or if it doesn't catch people? Because in either scenario, it works.
Right, I agree.
So
several of the concerns that have come out of the special education community relevant to the broad use of this initially is that the cost is a concern. Use of funds probably would come out if we mandated it but didn't fund it. We wouldn't fund it if we did it across the board or even partially across the board. That counties county school systems would use their special education funds for this rather than other programs. There are also concerns, and I would like to track this too, that students who are parents who see this as creating safety, which may or may not do, we're not sure yet, will be eager to have their kids in these classrooms, which violates the basic concept of trying to inclusion in general education settings as much as possible. And so we wouldn't want to make these rooms falsely attractive if they indeed are, or at least attractive. So I've heard these concerns in the special education community, which is why I think we need to move slowly and try a pilot. And that's my opinion.
And to speak that a little bit. So again, as a father of a 7-year-old nonverbal hyposensitive autistic child, right? If my child is injured, raped, or mentally abused in the classroom, he has no ability to tell us about it. Zero ability. I mean, we talk about vulnerable populations all the time in Annapolis. I don't know there's a more vulnerable population than a nonverbal autistic child anywhere on the planet. And this is designed to protect the most vulnerable population that we have. So I don't know, and certainly costs we can figure out, right? But I don't know. I would be opposed to a pilot. I think this is important, certainly important to me and my family. It's important to every single special needs advocate I've spoken to. I've not heard anyone opposed to this. Certainly other parents. And frankly, if we're talking about making a special needs classroom attractive to parents of these nonverbal kids, that's a good thing. We can figure out the cost, we can work on that piece. But as far as a pilot, I don't know what the pilot would prove or disprove. If nothing happens, then we could say it's working, or we haven't found anything. And if we catch stuff, then we find it's working, and maybe it's not as good of a deterrent. My biggest nightmare is something happening horrible to my son, and my son not being able to communicate that. We have the ability right now, and with the amount of autistic kids across the state skyrocketing, this is a problem that's going to grow in perpetuity. We have a real opportunity to do something that really, really matters right now for a lot of parents that are hurting right now, because it hurts just to have an autistic kid. I don't know. I think we have a great opportunity here to do something that really, really matters, and put the issue to bed once and for all. So I would be opposed to a pilot. I think we should push this forward permanently with all the amendments and stuff we still need to work through, but it should be mandatory, in my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you. Got Delegate Guyton next.
Thank you. I appreciate the thought that's gone into this suggestion. I also am opposed to a pilot, certainly one of this really minimal scale. We're talking about 6 out of 1,539 classrooms that have nonverbal kids, which is 0.3% of kids in a pilot. And I do have a PhD in research-based social science, and that's just not scientifically sound. It's not a meaningful pilot. It's not, there are guidelines that you should follow for these sorts of things, and those are numbers being just picked out of thin air. So I'm not saying that I'm not willing to negotiate some sort of pilot or slower implementation of this bill. As a matter of fact, as you said, you did see my suggestion, my other amendment, which suggested doing this over the next 7 years. It's not in until 2029, and a much slower pace to help deal with some of these issues. But a pilot like this that is not meaningful and does not solve the problems in any meaningful way that have been brought to us, I absolutely cannot support. But I appreciate you trying.
Thank you. Delegate Wilkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the previous two comments, I think that what I would submit is that from the hearing, and this was a very meaningful and really intense hearing that we had on this bill, what I heard from parents is the concern with not knowing what happened, not receiving good communication when their children who are nonverbal are coming home clearly harmed. And I think that if we did go the pilot route, it's not just that, we would see if there was deterrence or not deterrence. I think that's a kind of a side tangential issue. I'd be curious to get feedback from the parents. And I think that it should include a survey or something like that to better understand if and when hopefully the situations would occur. But if and when they do, that by having these cameras, there is sort of an ability to be able to respond, get a better sense of what is going on, what has happened, parent communication, parent information, filing a complaint, being able to really rectify the situation if possible. And I think that in whatever bill that we do, that should be the center, in addition to deterrence, because obviously we don't want these things to happen at all. But I think that parents having better tools to be able to know what is going on, and for the schools and the parents to be able to resolve it is something that would be important. I could go either way around the pilot. One part of me does think that for this is a very big change, and I think this is something that we have to roll out right. And so I think the positive of going the pilot direction, and maybe we could expand the number of schools. I think you said 3, perhaps it should be more. I think that the positive is that we can kind of see how all of that works, the goal that I just mentioned, the deterrence piece and all of those, and see what jurisdictions can share with each other, what the lessons are, what worked, what didn't work. Maybe we include what we just talked about regarding, if other complaints can be included. Maybe we find that was something that was a bad idea, so on and so forth, to kind of get some lessons learned. But at the same time, I do also see how rolling it out and mandating statewide would also be useful. So I think that we really would benefit from a little bit more conversation on this. I'm not opposed to a pilot, but I could also be swayed. Last comment is that in terms of if we do pilot it, I think that I'm curious to know if there are particular egregious schools where we are seeing certain patterns that have been coming forth, and if we should go ahead and mandate it for those. I remember there were a couple of schools that did come up at the hearing, or systems that came up at the hearing, and I wonder if we should, if there is a pattern, I don't know if there is, that we should make sure that those are included, just to see, if we see a difference.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. And you said we need a little more discussion. We have a little more. Delegate Griffith, I see you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the second bite of the apple. Honestly, and be very frank, I think this is actually, I'm not just trying to play an angle here, but I think there is an asset to the school systems and the teachers and the staff by having this as well, because we all know how many times you have certain kids with special needs who harm themselves, right, for a variety of reasons, through a variety of methods. And I think this would also use as an exoneration tool for when these kids do perform self-harm, to the teachers, to the staff, to the paraeducators, and would honestly, I think that would be another asset of this for all of us, because we have the prevention method, the prevention reason why, and then we add this. I think that would is another benefit of this program. So I just want to throw that in.
Thanks. I still see both your hands up. I assume you haven't taken them down. I'm going to go to Delegate Boatler next, and then Delegate Wilkins, I'll come back to you if you want to go again. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Question I have is because of what we saw in a lot of the testimony, that a lot of parents were, very concerned, and they were not being informed, if their child was injured at the school. They weren't being told, they were left out in the dark. And I've seen this in the past. This is not something new. I've seen it in Baltimore County on a number of occasions, some dealing with my own children. So my question is that if we are going to have these cameras in the classroom, who ultimately then has access, if there is a situation, will the parents be allowed to have access to this? Or is this going to be all handled administratively? Because to me, if it's just the school system controlling even the video, then the parents are going to be still in the same boat as they are right now.
So the way the bill reads right now is there are 4 entities that would have access to it in the event of a complaint: school system, school administration, police, and social services. They would be the ones who would be allowed to view it, to make a decision, a judgment, if there was something that needed to be acted upon, if the complaint needed to be acted upon. Then it goes further. Once a decision has been made about what the tape gives, or what the recording gives, then that would be then accessible to the parent and child, and I would like to add in to the teacher, or the school employee in this case, because I think they would also, whether or not it impugned them, they would still want to see what it was that caused them, just the same way that the students would. So that's the way the bill reads now. Like, I have that one addition I want to put in there, but generally it's 4 more legal entities in this case. It is not initially available to parents and students to see, because I believe the point of it is to eventually inform the parents, but it's really to take action if action is needed.
Well, that sounds kind of good on the surface, but the way it might play out, because like I say, I've seen this before in other situations where I've had to deal with school administration and all, and they're very, very good at really not giving you an answer. And to me, is there a way that, if the parents have a lawyer or something, that at least they could have access to this? I think in some regard, parents should be able to have access to it, because those 4 entities that you had listed, if they decide, well, there's nothing behind the curtain, but yet the parent is seeing something that they really do feel that something happened, that their child was hurt. but if the administration and these other entities decide that, well, there's nothing here, then we just move on. I still don't see, I'm just wondering, what about that protection that ultimately either the parents or their representatives would have an option to at least view what's going on without being blocked by, the administration?
Interesting suggestion, Delegate Boltner. If you want to come forward with something on that, I would only add that if you're going to do that, I think also the employee deserves the same access at the same time, if whatever legal representation they have on their own or from the collective bargaining agent. But Alistair, quick.
Thanks. They would have access to the complaint after it was resolved. They would have access to the video after the complaint was resolved,
right?
Not dependent on the resolution. So whether it was a finding of that abuse occurred or that there was a finding that abuse did not occur, the parent would still have access to it at that point under the bill as introduced.
Sounds like that's you got that. Delegate Lasanti, how's your speech there? Are you numbed at all?
Yes. But I just wanted to, I listened very intensely to a lot of the conversation, and I'm glad, Mr. Chairman, that you're going to give us some more time to really think through and process all of this. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we are all desperately looking for a solution that is going to protect children. At the end of the day, that is our ultimate responsibility, and that we ensure that our parents feel comfortable in the situation in the school system, and that when they are not with their children, that they are protected. So I just wanted to say that, and so we don't lose sight of that most important piece.
Thank you very much. Okay, Delegate Guyton, last bite at the apple. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an easy one because I was only going to respond to Delegate Boltner and also say there is a notification piece in the bill. And if I'm remembering this wrong, Alistair, feel free to correct me, that the parents are immediately within 24 hours, I believe, told that if there is a report of something has happened to their children. So they are not left out of this process. And if they don't agree with the decision, they will have a chance to see the video to
It has
pursue
to stay around for quite a while once there's been a complaint.
Yeah, it's going to be there a long time.
Yeah, that's right. If there's, sorry, I was talking about the parents get to see the video regardless of the conclusion of the complaint. But if in reviewing it, a school administrator sees abuse, they have a requirement to notify the parent within 24 hours. And then there's also a separate viewing of the evidence under that rubric, I think.
So our charges here, the things that I gathered were, Delegate Wilkins, I was going to sum up, but I'm going to give you a second bite or third bite at the apple.
Third, fourth, fifth. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, it's important. We're having an important and I think productive conversation here. It's important. I wouldn't have brought this bill forward if I didn't think that we needed to try to find a way to do this.
Yes, I think this has been such a helpful discussion. Well, I guess when I was reading the bill, and now I see it is very clear in here, I didn't really realize that the parents wouldn't be able to view the video, and I can think of some reasons why. So I was just wondering, that surprised me and kind of negates what I was saying earlier, because so a parent suspects, if you can walk me through maybe Alistair, how this would work. Parents suspects that something has happened. They file a complaint, but the parent is still kind of like in the dark because they're not going to get the video to even have a sense of exactly what's happening. But law enforcement gets it, school administrator gets it, supervisor from the administration, and child protective services. So I guess I'm just trying to understand how the parent gets their clarity and what I'm missing here around what has happened, given the people that are able to view the video.
So if I may, Alistair, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I always like to know I like to feel like I have my head wrapped around the bill pretty tight. So let's see if I'm correct. They would have access to it after those groups had agreed whether or not there was action necessary. Once they've resolved the complaint, either said, you complained, but there's no evidence that any staff member did something to the child, they must have injured themselves another way, or we saw it. The teacher actually whacked the kid over the head with a sock with sand in it, or whatever they, sprayed him in the face with water, whatever they did that was was egregious. But after those judgments are made, then that video would be available for them to observe. By the way, I'll point out, I don't know if we have it in this year, but I think we stipulated somewhere that they wouldn't be allowed to record it for distribution. I think that's in there. That the idea was for them to be able to see it, but not necessarily have it as a tool at their for their use later. Is that correct, Alistair? Did I get that pretty much right?
Yeah, that's right.
You want to trim that up for me a little bit or not?
I would just say, as like a general philosophical point, this bill is trying to balance a lot of different equities: the privacy of the teacher, the privacy of other students who aren't involved with the alleged complaint, the concerns of the parent, the concerns of anyone else involved, the concerns of law enforcement. So there's difficult decisions to be made there. But I think because of that, there's not an immediate viewing of the parent because there's risk of them. We're potentially messing with the federal law on the education. I'm sorry.
The ever famous FERPA.
FERPA, yes. Seeing educational information of students unrelated to the act. There is an exception to FERPA for law enforcement purposes, but I don't know if that leads to the viewing of that by parents. I think it leads to the viewing of that information by law enforcement. So,
and although it's not specific, it does say that efforts must be made to conceal the identities of students who are in the video to which the complaint is unrelated, which I think is important. I would say they have to, but that could really maybe make the process impossible for them. So I don't want to create barriers that cannot be stepped over here. And so it just says they'll make every effort. And they don't really have to. I mean, lots of students have their images on tape or recorded in hallways and things like that. And so, it's not out of the question, just as this is in a classroom.
Oh, that can't necessarily be viewed by parents,
Correct.
It's about
That's correct. Excellent
view
point. Thank you. I may have gone a bridge too far there. So the charges are for us to think about how we feel about as a committee about making this a pilot, or if we do, what size the pilot we would like to recommend. If we don't, then are we going to recommend a certain run up and dates on it, on that sort of thing? We have to come up with a clearer definition of what classrooms we're talking about here. And then we have to think about if we do make it a pilot, or even if we go with 25%, how do we select which schools and school systems are that first 25%, or how do we determine which schools or school systems are part of the pilot? Do we, as Delegate Wilkins suggested, gather some data and get MSDE to instruct them to make a decision on the schools that they feel might have the greatest likelihood that this has happened in the past based on past experience, or do we make it more random? These are all questions that I think we need to answer. I will take them up again. I don't know if we'll reach enough of consensus for us to move on the bill even the next time we meet. I will try to talk to members of the subcommittee offline to get a feel for which direction it might be good for me to recommend based on the general feeling. As we all agree, I think down the line we agree that we really do want to create a circumstance where children can be better protected, both by punitive, but even preventative measures like this. And I would like to think that we can come up with something that begins the process, at least, if not does it more thoroughly. So with that, I've had you on for over an hour here, and I really appreciate the time you've all invested. Delegate Asante, I appreciate you rushing through your dental procedure. I hope it's been done correctly. Very nice of you. I'm sorry we didn't. I'm sorry we were missing Delegate Branch, but I will bring her up to speed on what we've talked about. So for the good of the order, I'd like to move that we adjourn this subcommittee meeting. Thank you very much. We're going to go. Nobody.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.